I just felt these students deserved more than that. So I wrote to America, and those are the days of the typewriter. I wrote to companies in America and I said, will you import and send me these things? And they said, yes. Then I went to Kinokuniya and Maruzen and I said, if I bring in these things, will you buy it? And they said, yes. So my second business was my Little America bookstore, the first English bookstore in Japan.
Welcome back to another episode of the Inside Japan podcast. I'm Charlie, and today I'm speaking with Helene Uchida, who's a certified teacher and has been in Japan for over 40 years. She founded and manages Little America, a school that's been in Fukuoka since 1979, and she has some incredibly valuable insights into what teachers need to do to help Japanese learners to actually start improving their English. I hope you find this podcast as useful and interesting as I did. Helene, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for giving me this chance to share.
Yeah. So you've been in Japan for 40 years now.
Yes.
So
yes.
What year did you come to Japan and what brought you here originally?
I came in the late 70s, and the reason I came was to study Judo.
Oh, wow. Okay. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I was doing yoga in Hawaii, and I met a judoka on a ship that taught me Judo. And as the ship was leaving the Maui harbor, they said, come to Japan, we need English teachers. And I thought, that's a possibility. I am an English teacher. Oh, wow. So I left Maui at that next day, and I booked my ticket to Japan, and I came to Japan to study Judo.
Wow, that's amazing. So you were a trained teacher? That was what you were doing?
Yes, I taught junior high and high school in New York.
Oh, wow. So what's the difference between teaching junior high school and high school in New York compared to Japan? That must have been a big shock for you.
Well, I think it's a cultural difference. You know, in America, the kids were very outgoing and very sociable and very trusting of me and would tell me all of their problems and all of their secrets and ask for their advice. And Japanese kids are wonderful in their own way, but there always has been a certain distance between my junior high and high school students and me in Japan that I respect. And maybe because of language that they can't really show their innermost feelings. But I loved teaching junior high and high school in New York. It was very intimate for me. That intimacy is missing in Japan. That's the word. Intimacy is missing for me for junior high and high school kids.
Right. I think we talked about this in before we started the podcast, was that when you're having some kind of teaching relationship, really the relationship is absolutely paramount, especially for language learning. If you don't like the teacher who speaks English, and maybe they're the only person you know in your entire life who speaks English, then you're not going to have that much motivation to learn English.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how much has Japan changed in the last 40 years? Like not only in terms of English language education, but also just as a country, like their openness to outsiders, like how is...
Yeah, well, you know, it's just wonderful. It's gotten so much better. You guys are so lucky, you people that are coming here now, because when I came, there was no Costco, there was no Starbucks, there was no Seattle coffee, there were no clothes. I'm 5'8". I couldn't buy anything. I felt really isolated. There were no no government support systems for foreigners. Never lonely, but I felt very isolated. And now it's just everything's at your fingertips. When I go to Costco, I feel like I'm home. And when I go to Starbucks, I feel like I'm home. And we had long distance phone calls, no internet. So technology and global sharing has changed the atmosphere completely. But as far as English education goes, I don't think there's been that big a change. People are still studying for entrance examinations and putting a higher priority on JUCUs than on English communication, and people are still shooting for TOEIC or ACAN scores. So I don't think the average man on the street in Fukuoka speaks English better than he did 40 years ago. But when I go to Tokyo, I do see a difference. When I go to Tokyo with the service industry, I see a very big improvement in English as compared to when I was there 40 years ago, because I did live in Tokyo.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, what do you think is missing in Japan's, especially in the public school education system? Because I taught as an ALT in Nagoya for a little while, and I felt like I didn't really want to continue doing that, and I found other opportunities to teach where I thought my teaching would actually be more welcome, more useful, and I'd be able to see a big improvement in my students. Whereas, in the junior high school context, it's very difficult. So, what do you think is missing in Japan's public school education system?
I could talk about this for hours.
Mm.
I think that the Ministry of Education and the Board of Education consist of bureaucrats. And bureaucrats are not a bad thing, but when you're a bureaucrat, you're not that open to change and you want to do things the way you've always done it. And that's one problem. And I think the other problem is that because Japan is a Haji Shakai, Japan is a society that people don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to stand out and look stupid in front of other people, that they hesitate in the classroom to speak English, and the teachers hesitate to speak English, and everybody's very busy hesitating.
Mm.
And I think we need more Japanese role models. We need more good Japanese teachers out there who can speak English and encourage their kids to speak English, as opposed to hiding behind a book. I notice when I teach junior high and high school students and university students from other facilities, not from my school, that they hide behind the book and they talk to the book. And my husband always says, you're going to talk to the book or you're going to talk to the foreigner when you meet someone. So I think a whole array of things make it difficult in the Japanese public school educational system, and that there's no atmosphere in the schools. The schools look like Japanese schools, and I always say every school should have one English classroom, and that everybody should go to that classroom and be a guest in that English territory and be motivated to speak English. But all the classrooms look very Japanese and are treated in a very Japanese way. And I think people aren't motivated to speak English.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I remember reading this a long time ago, that there was a study of I think it was Russian immigrants to Canada, and they had half of the people who had recently immigrated, they continued on with their Russian cultures and traditions, and then there was the other group that basically integrated themselves into Canada and decided, like, I'm going to be Canadian, that's how I'm going to behave. And what they found was, after just like 2 years or so, the children who decided, or their parents decided, or the study decided to integrate them into the Canadian community, they not only spoke much, much better English, but they spoke it without an accent. That was the most interesting thing, was that they were actually, because usually pronunciation is incredibly difficult, but I've met a lot of Japanese people who can speak with like maybe an American or an Australian accent. You can hear it in their voice. And that's just from living in the United States or Australia for a year or so. And I think a lot of that is because maybe when they go to those countries, when they go to those places, they feel like this is an atmosphere shift, and I feel at home here, or I feel like included in that kind of conversation. If you have that in a classroom in Japan, like this was, I think, the biggest difference between teaching in different places. When I taught at ICU, the International Christian University High School, that whole environment, there's a lot of English speakers there. There's an English department there. And so the children were encouraged very heavily that, English is something that you can use every day. English is something that you will use every day, and that is a normal part of our everyday life. It's not something to be afraid of. It's not something that you should shy away from. And so most of the students, even the lowest level students, I saw, a high proportion of them speaking English very fluently by the time they finished at the high school.
Yeah, I think what you're saying has a lot to do with the ability to take risks. And I think it's a key point that in the current system, students and teachers don't want to take risks. They want to stay in their comfort zone. And in order to make progress, you have to take a risk. And I think that's one of the things that's missing in the English classroom and Japanese public schools.
Right. So in a Japanese classroom context, what are some of the principles that you have in your classroom to make it a better place to learn? Like, especially if you compare to like a beginner teacher's classroom or a Japanese teacher's classroom?
Well, in my classroom, I'm always the hostess with the mostest. I'm at the door waiting for them to come in. And I prepared the room, and I have music going, and I have nice posters around the room, and I have American flags and maps of the world. So when the kids walk in that room and they have to have eye contact with me and they come in the room and I say, hello, how are you? Come on in. We've made a connection. And then they come in and they hear the music and they see the atmosphere and they think subliminally that Japanese doesn't belong here, that this is another place. And I always want my kids to feel like they're going to America without an airplane, because our school is Little America. And then when the kids come in, I have a series of manageable challenges for them to do. And all of those things are connected to connection. Either they make a connection with me, or they make a connection with their classmate, or they get recognition for being able to do something. But everything is a tinge difficult, and I call them manageable challenges. And there are about 12 in each class, because even coming into the classroom and having eye contact with me is difficult for some children. And they'll come in and then say hello, and they will look at me, and I'll make them go out and come in again. And it's culture. And I try to invite them into my culture, and I encourage them to take a risk. And if they fail, I help them get up again.
That's really good. And it's interesting because that sounds a lot like what you were talking about before with your judo practice, that you've kind of brought this, like, it's a little bit difficult. It's a challenge, but if you get knocked down, like, come back up again. So I imagine judo's had a really big impact on your ideas around teaching.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you brought that up, that if you fall down, you get up again. And that's my favorite Japanese proverb: fall down 8 times, fall down 7 times, get up 8. I've just embraced that wholeheartedly. Yeah, I learned so much from doing judo at Waseda. I was in the Waseda Judo Bu. I was not a student there, but they let me join the Judo Bu, and I joined them. I was the only white belt, the only female, and the only foreigner. And those boys were so kind to me and so supportive. And what I learned from doing judo, 2 things: respect. You have to respect your partner. My husband was my first judo teacher, and he said, you can't do judo alone. You have to respect your partner. And if your partner is stronger than you, he helps you. And if your partner is weaker than you, then you help him. That was really mind-blowing for me, because I'd never thought about that. I've always been good in sports, and I always thought of my partner as my opponent, and never that it was a teamwork kind of thing. So that was very interesting. And then I applied that to teaching. Really, you can't speak English alone.
Absolutely.
You can study alone, but you can't speak, you can't communicate alone. You need a partner. So your partner is worthy of your eye contact. Your partner is worthy of respect. Your partner is worthy of questions, of your listening to what he or she is saying. So I bring that into the classroom, and I make it very clear to students that you can't speak English alone. You need each other. So 90% of the way our lessons are conducted is with pair work. And there's a lot of pair work going on. And if someone doesn't show respect, and the other thing about respect is, if I show respect to my students, like a mirror, they'll show that respect back to me. And they'll show respect to their classmates, and they'll show the respect to the subject matter. English is not a joking matter. People don't make jokes. Oh no, oh my God. Nobody does that in my class, because we respect what we're doing. And I think if there's no respect in a classroom, there's no education. So that's key for me. And I got that from judo. And I'm very indebted to the Waseda Judo Bu for letting me join, the only white belt, the only foreigner, the only female. Really opened a whole new world for me.
Yeah, and that's so interesting, because I've had experiences in classes where the teacher isn't really an English teacher. Like, they know a little bit of English, but they're not that passionate about it. And you can see very quickly the students, the teachers don't respect the process, and they're just like, I don't really want to be doing this. But and then the students can feel that, like, they're very intuitive young people. They can see exactly how the teacher feels. And if the teacher is like, oh, like, I really don't want to be here, then they're definitely going to feel that. But yeah, I love that your sort of martial arts approach has kind of influenced your teaching. And you said that you met that your husband was your first judo instructor. Was that you met him through judo, or
Yes, 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 because he had attended two universities. Waseda was his second university, and everybody was busy preparing for competitions. And since it was his second university, he didn't have competition. So the teacher said, go teach her, but don't fall in love with her. He said that to him. And sure enough, he fell in love with me. But that's another story. But in any event, I'm very indebted to my husband and the Judo Guru, and I learned a lot about Judo, and it changed my life. And he says that English changed his life because he didn't speak English at that time.
Wow.
So we had a profound effect upon each other.
Wow, that's incredible.
Mm,
So you were teaching him English and he was teaching you Japanese, and you were both learning judo together.
yes, yes. And we had our wedding ceremony in the Judo Dojo,
Wow.
because we felt that the Judo Dojo was our true Nakodo-san. And we
That's
didn't have money
amazing.
to pay for a hotel or anything. Hotel
And I
wedding.
think you told me before that you started teaching your students also in the dojo, not just
In the Judo
not martial arts,
Dojo.
but your English classes too.
Yes, because, in America, I taught junior high and high school. And in Tokyo, I taught businessmen from Mitsubishi, Mitsubishi Shoji, Sumitomo Kinzaku, all these great, companies. And then we went to Greece, and I had my baby there. And so he was teaching judo. Then we came back to Japan because his father died. And I thought I would get a job teaching high school or junior high or something. And the mothers in the judo dojo would say, could your wife teach children? And I said, decide, no, I don't teach kids. No, I teach junior high or high school or adults. And they kept coming with the osembe and the cookies and the onegai shimasu. And finally I said, yes. I had 3 students, and we're in the judo dojo sitting on tatami, seiza, teaching them English, my first lesson. And I was just smitten after the first class. They were so responsive. They were so excited. I could see the light in their eyes. And I said, this is it. I'm going to spend my energy in this arena.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the conversation, and I just want to take a quick moment to mention that this podcast is only possible because of the support of JobsinJapan.com. So next time you're looking for a job, check out JobsinJapan.com. There are tons of jobs on there, not only in English teaching, but also software engineering, hospitality, marketing and consulting, among many others. Most of the jobs on the board do not require any specific level of Japanese, and you can get started in minutes. So next time you're looking for a job, check out JobsinJapan.com, and let's get back to the conversation. So how many students did you get up to, and how quickly did that kind of grow? Because I can see a lot of that happening with people who start schools, especially when it's like a word of mouth thing, or something like in the countryside. Yeah.
Word of mouth. That's what it is in the eikaiwa business. I started with 3. And when we left the dojo, there were 170. We didn't have, because my husband taught judo Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I taught English Tuesday, Thursday, and there were just too many. So we had to go out and look that's a big risk, looking for a building to rent and do all that. Right. But it was all word of mouth. It was all, and really, I didn't know what I was doing then, like I know what I'm doing now, but it just worked. It worked because there was respect in the classroom. I made a lot of mistakes. I used to mix Japanese and English and say, give me your shukudai, put that in the gomibako. It was really bad. But they felt my heart, they felt my passion. I was in love with them. And then little by little, I learned how to teach the way I teach now, because I observed my students and looked at what worked and what didn't work. And they didn't like it when I mixed Japanese and English. They wanted the thrill of being able to understand me in English. And I gave them simple, easy to understand English, and they could do it. So my kids were my first mentors, my mentors, not my first, my mentors. Everything I learned about teaching English in Japan, I learned from my students.
And so what's your thought about that now? Because I've seen that in classes too, where teachers will mix Japanese and English, and especially in classes with a Japanese teacher, where it's easier for them to explain, like, for example, instructions for something in Japanese.
Robbing them of an experience. And I always say to my Japanese teachers, because a lot of Japanese teachers come to my seminars, don't be a dorobo-san. Don't be a robber. Don't do it in Japanese. Speak simple English and show what you're doing, and let them take the risk and try to understand what you're doing, and repeat. I repeat a lot. It's my biggest service I can give to my students. So I think Japanese teachers who, out of kindness, I know, I really understand, I've been here a long time, out of kindness want to explain everything to them in Japanese. That's just robbery. This is a Setsume Shakai. Everybody wants to explain. You can't explain how to speak English. You can't explain how to play the piano. You can't explain how to play football. You got to do it. So you have to set up the apparatus and show them how to do it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it does take a little while to get that experience and to understand that, there's a lot of teachers who will come here because they really just want to live in Japan. And usually those people will leave within a year or two. So how do you find the people who actually care about education and they want to help Japanese students to become fluent? Like, what advice do you give them and what do you do for them?
Well, I don't know how I find them. I think they find me. I don't find these teachers. I've got 100 people in my teaching organization all over Japan, and they
Wow.
find me. So they come to my seminars and we share and they help each other.
So
But you're
hang on, tell me about that teaching organization. Is that something that you set up after you had some experience teaching for a while and you just wanted to help other teachers, or how did that work out?
can I have 2 minutes to explain it?
Sure, go ahead.
I came to Japan, I started teaching English in Fukuoka, and then business really expanded and there were no materials,
Mm.
just tape cassettes and books. And I just felt these students deserved more than that. So I wrote to America, and those are the days of the typewriter. I wrote to companies in America and I said, will you import and send me these things? And they said, yes. Then I went to Kinokuniya and Maruzen and I said, if I bring in these things, will you buy it? And they said, yes. So my second business was my Little America bookstore, the first English bookstore in Japan, mail order. I think we had 80 people in our database. First one. So we started doing that. And then a word got out, and Oxford University Press invited me to be a presenter at one of their events at Nihonbashi at Maruzen. And I was doing the presentation at Maruzen. It was a week, and I did flashcards Monday, Wednesday, Friday, different materials. And these guys who look like you, would come back to all of my present. I said, "You're here again?" And they would come back to my, and then finally the last day, one guy from England, his name was Ben. He said, "Could you start a group and teach guys like us how to teach? Because we're here, we're married to Japanese women, we speak English, but we don't know how to teach it. And you know what you're doing. Could you teach us?" And his name was Ben. And I went home and I discussed it with my husband, and I started my teaching organization. And to make a long story short, I've been all over Japan, from Okinawa to Hokkaido, everywhere doing teacher seminars. But now, thanks to Zoom, I can stay here in Fukuoka and do it. So they've always found me.
Wow.
But I'm very indebted to Oxford University Press and Maruzen and that British guy named Ben, who said, please, there are people here that need this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, I had to figure out how to be a teacher. Really, I got thrown in the deep end with, I got a job at a kindergarten where there was no curriculum whatsoever. They expected the teachers to come up with the curriculum on the fly as they taught it, and they didn't keep even materials from previous years that they'd already used. They didn't even give them to the next teacher to use. They just, they threw it all away in the trash, or they let the teacher keep it and bring it with them. And so I ended up having to create a curriculum for 3 to 4 year olds from scratch with some of my co-teachers and other teachers that were really helpful. Like, I really needed them, and I was completely in over my head. And I remember going home every day for the first maybe at least 2 months of this job, and every day I was looking up stuff online, and it was hard to find things. And I bought books that were, I'd get them when I got home and I'd read them. I'd be like, this is terrible, I can't use any of this, or I can only use 5% of this book, and all of these exercises and materials are almost useless. And it took me a really long time until I found Montessori Method, which really informed my teaching from then on, because I read a lot about Maria Montessori,
He
who
was a wonderful, wonderful,
yeah,
wonderful
absolutely.
educator. Yes.
Honestly, anyone who's listening to this, I highly recommend, if you're teaching kindergarten age or even elementary school,
Montessori.
yeah,
Yeah.
look up Montessori. It's basically about free inquiry and letting children learn, because they will by themselves.
And believing in children.
Right. Yes. Believe. Yeah,
Because she
exactly.
started with kids that were mentally handicapped and nobody wanted any part of them. And she brought out the best in them. She believed in them.
Right.
Believe in the children is very important.
I think, yeah, I remember reading about it, and that actually the students that she had, so there were handicapped kids and kids with mental disorders, and she managed to get them to beat the national
Yes,
average
yes,
in the
yes,
educational
yes,
tests.
yes.
And what was really interesting about that was that people were asking her, like, how did you do this? How did you achieve this amazing thing? And she wasn't asking that. She was like, how are you failing these kids so much that kids with a standard education who don't have any mental handicaps at all are struggling with these basic things? And so, yeah, that really informed my teaching principles when I was teaching kindergarten, and it helped me get a job at a very famous international kindergarten here in Tokyo.
Fuji, yes.
Yeah, Fujiyoshi, and that's when I worked at the and if you haven't seen this, there's a TED talk about this kindergarten. I believe the TED talk is called something like the best kindergarten you've ever seen, and I saw that and I wanted to go and visit that school and find out what they were doing, how they were doing what they were doing, and that was a really interesting few years I worked at that school. So
Yes, I looked at that video and I really enjoyed it very, very much. Thank you for sharing that with me. And it sounds like, what I do and what Montessori did and what they're doing at Fuji is it's experiential learning. It's not sitting here looking at a book and memorizing something. And I think that's, one of the unique things about teaching English in Japan is that Japanese are great at studying, but that's not how you learn English. You learn English by experiencing it. So in my case, I feel like I'm not a teacher. I'm an orchestrator. I'm a facilitator. I'm a guide, and I'm guiding students around English and giving them the chance to speak English because this society denies them of that experience.
mm.
They can't get that outside my classroom. So I try to give as many experiences as I can in English. Sometimes they succeed and sometimes they fail. And then you
Mm.
pick yourself up and you try again.
Right. And my real hope, I think, is that more Japanese people get to go outside of Japan and get to experience it for themselves, because that's when I notice that Japanese people become a lot more enthused about English. Is not when they're learning in classes, because the classes are mostly boring and they're mostly, it's mandatory. Like you said, bureaucrats don't have any investment in the students' success because they don't have any punishment or any reward when the students succeed or fail. So I think it's really important for students to get outside Japan and find something about English culture that they like. One of the things that surprised me the most, one of my closest friends in Japan who I met when I first moved here, he's married to a Japanese woman who both of her children speak English to an almost native level, and she doesn't. She taught them growing up. This is before my friend married her. So she has two children from another marriage that are absolutely incredible English speakers, and they just speak English like it's no problem. And she told me the reason why is because when they were growing up, she didn't tell them like, hey, eigo shabette, or something like that, speak English. She didn't try to compel them to produce English. She didn't tell them that English is super useful, you must use it. She just tried her best to speak English with other people and didn't make a big deal of it. She didn't make it like, oh, English, like you've got to learn, it's very useful or anything.
Just did it naturally.
Right. She just did it naturally, and it became a part of their vernacular, just the way that they exist in the world is, I also speak English. So if I speak to an English person, I'll, and they do it in an interesting way. Like they, if people speak English to them, they just switch. And it's, and I feel like that kind of thing, they had more people like that in Japan, where it's like, don't make such a big deal of it. Like one of the worst things when I was teaching was seeing parents telling their kids, eigo shabette yo, or something like, and pushing their kid forward. And, think of any situation when you're a little kid, your parents are saying, do this now, perform, it really, it crushes their interest in it as well, because they feel like it's something that they have to do rather than something that, they have this tool that they can use to communicate with more people. So that's one of the things that I'm really hoping to see more of. And I guess it seems like to me, I've only been in Japan for 9 years now, but it seems like to me that more and more people are able to speak English just a little bit. People my age and slightly older, slightly younger, who they're going to have children, and I hope it might take a few generations. It might take a lot longer than we think, but like you said, in the last 40 years, like, Japan has changed so much, and coming to Tokyo, you can see this because there's so many foreigners here. You can throw a stone in a crowd and hit a foreigner.
Right.
So yeah, I really hope that that will improve as time goes on. It's not going to be something that will happen very quickly, but it will happen.
It has to happen. It has to happen because, this is we're all a part of a global community now. And Japanese need other countries, and other countries need what Japan has. And English is the way to go. In the old days, you could have a translator and interpreter, but relationships are based on being able to communicate. But I want to say one thing. I don't think you have to go abroad to open up the world of English to you. I always tell my students my favorite person in Japanese history was John Manjiro. And you know about John Manjiro.
Oh, I've never heard of him before.
Please look it up on the internet,
Okay.
Later. He is the first Japanese person to live in America and go to school as a student. His ship was shipwrecked, and he was picked up by a whaling ship, and they took him to Hawaii. And he was with 3 other kids, and the captain let the other kids stay in Hawaii. But he saw something in John Manjiro and said, do you want to go with me to the mainland? And John Manjiro went to the mainland. They went to Massachusetts, and he went to school, and he lived with his captain, and he mastered English. I'm sure it was broken, but he mastered it. And he came back to Japan. This was during the Tokugawa period when you were supposed to leave Japan. And he came back to Japan and became a samurai, even though he was from a fisherman's family, because of what he had learned and mastered. And he wrote a book on navigation for Japan. And I tell my kids, John Manjiro had no dictionary. John Manjiro had no teacher. John Manjiro had no textbooks. He did it himself. And I think Japanese kids are used to being spoon-fed for English. And I tell them, you have to do it yourself. You have to take a risk. You have to have experiences, good and bad. And you've got the internet. Go to YouTube, study songs, watch sports, do it in English. So you're not limited like Japan was during the Edo period. And think of John Manjiro. So that's your homework, Charlie. I want you to look up John Manjiro because he's my hero.
I will do. I think that's a great place to end it. Helene, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate you. How can people find out more about what you're doing and your business, Little America?
Just look on the internet. You'll see Little America, and my teaching organization is TEMI, T-E-M-I. And I'm happy to help teachers in any way I can. I've got a great team here. Charlie, thank you so much for letting me share my ideas with you today, really. Thank you.
It's been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay, see you next time. Bye.